Do you remember?
Mm-hmm.
Tell me about it.
I got them from the dishwasher.
What kind of knives?
Big sharp ones.
And what do you want to do with those knives?
Kill John and Mommy with them, and Daddy.
The child speaking in that clip was just 6 years old. Her name was Beth Thomas, and at the time of the recording, she was being monitored by a psychiatrist for reasons that would soon become clear. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't look confused or afraid. She spoke with complete clarity, as if the words didn't carry any weight at all. She admitted to hurting animals. She described plans to kill her family, and she didn't seem to understand why any of it was wrong. At such a young age, Beth Thomas had already become a danger to everyone around her, including the people trying to save her. Details about Beth Thomas's birth are limited. It's believed she was born around 1982, somewhere in the United States. When she was a year old, her mother died, leaving Beth and her newborn brother Jonathan alone with their biological father. He wasn't a caregiver. He was violent, neglectful, and over the course of several months, he sexually abused Beth. He would also hurt Jonathan. And when he wasn't doing that, he simply left them. By the time child welfare officers stepped in, the damage was already visible. Beth was found screaming, covered in her own waste. Jonathan had been left unattended in a crib with a spoiled bottle and a misshapen skull, flattened at the back from how he'd been positioned. He was 7 months old. Beth was just 19 months. In February 1984, both children were removed from the home and placed into the care of the state. Soon after, the Department of Social Services contacted 2 prospective adoptive parents, a Christian couple named Tim and Julie Tennant. They'd been married for over a decade and were unable to have children of their own, and were told that Beth and Jonathan were normal and healthy. They brought the children into their house, named them Beth and Jonathan Thomas, and tried to build a life around them. But it didn't take long for signs to appear. Beth had recurring nightmares. She described a man coming up the stairs and touching her. In her dreams, she bled and cried. She was hurt and left alone. The man never spoke. He just watched her suffer. During the day, Beth would act out. She lied compulsively. She defied rules. She didn't react to punishment. Julie said it was like trying to discipline someone who didn't care if they lived or died. And from there, it would only escalate. She began to harm animals. One day, Julie found her pulling a bird's nest out of a tree. Beth was told to leave it alone, that the mother wouldn't return if the nest was moved. She didn't respond. She took the nest down and crushed the baby birds in her hands. Then, she started hurting Jonathan, even going so far as abusing him, both physically and sexually. She once smashed his head on the concrete floor of the basement. Another time, she touched him while he was asleep. Her behavior didn't change when they caught her. She admitted to it. And when they asked why, she just said she felt like it. Julie also began noticing that knives were going missing from the kitchen. When she confronted Beth, the child smiled. She said she wanted to use them, to kill her brother, then her mother, then her father. By that point, Tim and Julie were locking her bedroom door every night. They kept the knives hidden. They kept Jonathan away from her, and they tried to keep going, but it couldn't continue. They asked the adoption agency for information, anything that might explain why this was happening, but their requests were denied. Confidentiality laws meant they weren't allowed to know what Beth had been through. With nowhere left to go, they turned to professionals. Beth was diagnosed with reactive attachment disorder, also known as RAD. It's a rare psychological condition that develops in early childhood, usually between the ages of 6 months and 3 years, and it's almost always the result of severe neglect or abuse. Her diagnosis was made by Dr. Ken Maggid, a clinical psychologist. And over time, in a controlled setting, Beth began to explain where it had come from. She spoke about the man who used to hurt her, about what he did and how long it went on. It matched the timeline from her earliest years. the months she spent alone with her biological father after her mother's death. Children with RAD fail to form emotional bonds with their caregivers. Some become withdrawn, others display extreme aggression. In Beth's case, it was total detachment. She didn't show empathy, nor did she respond to affection. She didn't seem to recognize the difference between right and wrong. And it made sense. Her mother was gone before she ever formed a bond, and her father was the source of her trauma. There was never anyone for her to attach to, and by the time she was adopted, the window had already closed. In 1990, a documentary titled Child of Rage was released. It followed Beth's early therapy sessions and the work being done to keep her under control. By that point, she had already been diagnosed, and the focus had shifted from asking what was wrong to understanding why.
Let's talk about what happened once when you were smaller, when you found some baby birds in a tree. What did you do then?
I took them out.
Mm-hmm. And what did Mom say to you?
That the mother will not come back if somebody touches her baby.
Mm-hmm. With the baby birds, what did you do?
Took them out of the tree.
And what did you do with them?
Played around too rough. Also, when at the end, I picked it up and I thought it was Dad, and I came to say, "Mommy, is this bird dead?" And she said, she called Daddy and said, "Tim," and Daddy came and I think I remember that they said yes.
Mm-hmm. And so did the little baby birds die?
I don't know.
You don't remember?
I just remember that I remember that Mommy and Daddy saying the last bird we got was dead.
Mm-hmm. Do you know what Mom said to me? She said that all of them were dead. Did you squeeze them? Did Baby Beth squeeze them? You're doing a good job, honey. Go ahead and tell me what happened.
I squeezed them.
And what happened?
They died.
Tell me about the knives. Where did you get them?
From the drawer.
And where else?
I got them from the dishwasher.
What kind of knives?
Big sharp ones.
And what do you want to do with those knives?
Kill John and Mommy with them, and Daddy.
After her sessions with Dr. Ken Magid, Beth was removed from her adoptive home. The decision was made to separate her from the family temporarily, as her behaviour was still unpredictable. She was placed in the care of Connell Watkins, a therapist who specialised in high-risk behavioural cases. The programme was strict. Beth had to ask permission to eat, to use the bathroom, even just to speak. Her room was kept locked at night, and privileges had to be earned. The goal was to push her into forming trust through routine and structure, and over time, her behaviour began to change. She started showing remorse. She acknowledged what she had done. She talked about the harm she caused her adoptive family, and for the first time, she showed signs of empathy. But she didn't return to the Tennant household. During the course of her treatment, she was adopted again, this time by a woman named Nancy Thomas. Beth continued her treatment into adolescence. Over time, she became more stable. Her behaviour improved, and eventually, she was cleared to return to a more normal life. She graduated from the University of Colorado with a degree in nursing. In 2005, she began working as a registered nurse at Flagstaff Medical Center in Arizona. She went on to specialize in neonatal intensive care, helping care for premature and high-risk newborns. Beth also began working with her second adoptive mother, Nancy Thomas, speaking publicly about her experience with reactive attachment disorder. Together, they co-authored a book and started a program called Families by Design, aimed at helping other families raising children from abusive or traumatic backgrounds. but not everyone involved in her treatment would be remembered the same way. Connell Watkins, the same therapist who oversaw Beth's care during the most intensive stage of her treatment, was later convicted of negligent child abuse. In 2000, a 10-year-old girl named Candace Newmaker died during a session in Watkins' care. Like Beth, she had been diagnosed with reactive attachment disorder. Watkins was attempting a controversial form of therapy known as rebirthing. The idea was to simulate birth. The child was wrapped tightly in flannel sheets to represent a womb, then told to fight her way out. For 70 minutes, 4 adults pushed down on her body with pillows and their hands while she struggled beneath the blankets. Candace repeatedly told them she couldn't breathe. At one point, she said she was going to die, and she repeated this statement 11 times. Her adoptive mother was present in the room. The session was recorded on video, and by the time the blankets were removed, Candace had stopped moving. She was pronounced dead later that day. Watkins was sentenced to 16 years in prison. She served 7. Beth's life moved in the opposite direction. She recovered, she found stability, and eventually, she disappeared from headlines altogether. But the recording didn't. It's been over 30 years since the documentary was first aired, and she was just 6 years old. Her feet couldn't even touch the floor, and yet she talked calmly about violence, abuse, and death. Not as something she feared, but as something she understood. A child, shaped by violence, speaking plainly about things no child should understand. It was the night of Thursday, November 1st, 2017, in Maybank, Texas. At around 11:30 p.m., Jake Henderson called 911 and told dispatchers that his wife, Sarah, was acting strange. He said she might be suicidal and that she had talked about hurting herself. He wasn't sure if she was serious, but he wanted someone to come check. Deputies were sent to the house. They spoke with both Jake and Sarah, asked a few questions, and took a quick look around. Both of them said everything was fine, and there was no sign of anything suspicious, so the officers left. But just 3 hours later, 911 would be dialed again, and by then, it was already too late. Sarah Henderson was 29 years old. She lived with her husband, Jake, and her 2 daughters, 7-year-old Kaylee Danielle Hall and 5-year-old Kenley Henderson. The family lived in Maybank, Texas, a small town that stretches across Henderson and Kaufman counties. There had been a couple of police visits to the house before, one in 2015, when a neighbor heard yelling and called it in. It turned out Sarah had been arguing with someone over the phone outside. A few months later, they reported a suspicious car near the property. Neither incident led to anything. But in the weeks leading up to the shooting, neighbors said Sarah had started acting strange. She talked about people being after her. Child Protective Services had looked into her in 2010, but the details of that investigation were never made public. On the night of November 1st, Sarah started acting strange again. At 11:30 p.m., Jake called 911. He told dispatchers she was freaking out, that she thought someone was out to get her. He said she might be suicidal.
Hello?
Yes, sir. This is Trisha from EMS. We got disconnected.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, tell me exactly what's going on.
My wife, she's like, something's going on with her.
Okay. Can you describe what's going on? The symptoms?
Like she's freaking out, like somebody's out to get her.
Okay, give us just one moment. Is she awake?
Okay, I promise.
Yes, ma'am.
Is she breathing?
Yes, ma'am. She's saying she's all right now.
A few minutes later, he called back, said she was fine now, and that everything had calmed down.
EMS, this is Desiree.
Yes, ma'am. I just talked to a lady in there a while ago about sending someone out.
Okay.
I was going to see if I can get it disregarded.
And are you the one that called it in originally?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And why would you like to cancel the call?
She's fine now.
And what was your name?
Jake Henderson.
Okay, so just let me verify. You want to cancel the ambulance at this time?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Okay, I'll let them know, okay?
Thank you.
You're welcome. Bye-bye.
Following this call, deputies went to the house anyway just to be sure. They arrived around 11:45 and spoke with both of them. No one appeared to be in danger, there were no signs of violence, and there was nothing that gave officers a reason to act. So, they left. Jake was the last to fall asleep that night. A few hours later, Sarah woke him up and told him something that left him with no choice but to reach for the phone and call 911 again.
Henderson County 911.
Yes. My wife. My wife just shot her kid.
Okay, is this Jacob?
Yes.
Okay, what is your wife's name?
She's trying to commit suicide now. She's trying to choke herself. Why do you keep grabbing your neck?
What is her name, sir?
Sarah Henderson.
Sarah Henderson?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. All right, and how old are the children?
7 and 5.
And they're in the bedroom?
Huh?
Are they in the bedroom, sir?
No, they're in the living room.
They're in the living room and they're not breathing?
No.
God, forgive me. Please. Why did I do that, babe?
I don't know.
She's not trying to leave or anything, correct?
What's going on here, Jay?
Nothing's going on. That's why I tried telling you. She keeps saying somebody's after her.
Please, shoot me, please.
I'm not shooting you. No. No. I can't.
You don't understand, Jake. You don't understand, babe. You don't understand.
Don't understand what? I don't understand at all.
When officers arrived, Sarah was still inside the house. She was arrested on the spot. In interviews with investigators, she admitted that she'd been planning the shootings for at least 2 weeks. She said she tried to shoot Jake while he was sleeping, but the gun jammed. That's what woke him up. He took the weapon from her and called 911. When they asked her why she did it, she said she was going crazy, that she felt overwhelmed, and she believed people were out to get her. Jake told investigators she had been paranoid in the days leading up to the shooting. A friend she'd seen the day before said the same. She was evaluated by 2 psychologists. One said she was sane, the other said she wasn't. In the end, the court ruled her competent to stand trial, but there never was one. In a full courtroom filled with family members and law enforcement, 31-year-old Sarah Nicole Henderson pleaded guilty to 2 counts of capital murder. In exchange, she was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole instead of facing the death penalty. These 911 calls stick with you, not just because of the tears and raw emotion coming from Jake, but because the signs were all there. It was clear there was something wrong. The neighbors had noticed. Jake had too. He was worried enough to call 911, afraid she might hurt herself or someone else, but somehow she convinced everyone that things were fine. And so, Jake went to bed that night thinking that really was the case, when in reality, it was anything but. It was just after 3:45 in the morning when emergency services were called to a quiet residential street in Derby.
The house is on fire. My kids are in bed.
Yes, what address?
18 Victory Road.
18 West Victory Road.
Arlington, Derby.
The house is on 18 Victory Road and the kids are inside.
Yeah, the kids are in bed.
The fire had already taken hold by the time crew arrived. Flames were pouring from the windows and smoke blanketed the entire street. Inside the home were 6 children, all of them asleep, all of them trapped. Their parents were already outside, shouting for help. One of them was on the phone with emergency services. The other was smashing windows, trying to get in. The audio is difficult to listen to, because for a moment, it feels real. The panic, the urgency, the grief. But what made it so disturbing wasn't the fire itself, but rather the shocking truth that followed. The voices on the 999 call were Mick and Marie Philpott. They lived at 18 Victory Road, a council house in a quiet part of Derby. Mick was already known to the public, not for his work, as he was unemployed, but for the way he lived. He was a father of 17 children, and for years he shared his home with his wife Marie, his mistress Lisa, and their combined 11 children. He once appeared on the Jeremy Kyle Show, a British tabloid talk show, to explain how it all worked. Another time, in a televised documentary, a member of Parliament spent a week trying to get him back into work. She failed. He was offered multiple jobs, but he didn't turn up. When asked about his lifestyle, he said he'd like to marry one woman and divorce the other, then said he was considering a vasectomy. He didn't seem ashamed. If anything, he seemed proud. And as public criticism grew, so did his profile. He became a tabloid villain, a man who refused to work, demanded a bigger house, and claimed it was all for the good of his children. But behind the image was a long history of abuse. In 1978, at the age of 21, Philpott tried to kill his 17-year-old girlfriend. Her name was Kim Hill. He stabbed her more than a dozen times while she lay in bed. When her mother tried to stop him, he stabbed her too. Kim survived, but only just. Both her lungs collapsed, and her bladder, kidney, and liver were punctured. Philpott was sentenced to 7 years in prison, but served just over 3. After his release, he married another woman. They had 3 children. She later described him as violent and controlling, said she prayed he would leave her for someone else. And soon enough, he did. The next woman was 16-year-old Heather Kehoe. He was 37. She ran away from home to live with him and had 2 children in quick succession. He beat her too, mostly because the children weren't girls. When she left him, she took legal custody of the kids. He replaced her within a year. This time, it was Marie. She moved into his house in 2000, and they married in 2003. By then, another teenager, Lisa Willis, had also joined the household. Like the others, she was young, just 16, an orphan and a single mother. Philpott moved her in, made her share the household with his wife, and treated both as partners. Lisa even served as a bridesmaid at his wedding to Marie. In public, he framed it as unusual, but functional. In private, it was violence and control. By 2006, his setup had become so well known that the press dug up his old conviction. It didn't seem to bother him. If anything, it added to the persona, the angry, self-righteous father demanding more space, more support, more money. So when people saw him on the news in 2012, standing outside a burning house, in tears, begging for help, they didn't see a criminal. They saw a man who had just lost 6 of his children. And for a moment, they believed him. It was just after 3:45 in the morning when emergency services were called. Marie tells the operator that her house is on fire and that her children are trapped inside. In the background, her husband can be heard shouting that he's trying to reach them, but can't break through the smoke. What follows is a recording that many believed captured the worst moment of these parents' lives. A desperate call for help in the final moments before everything was lost.
Where are you phoning from now?
I'm in the garden, in the back garden.
You're in the back garden, 18 Victory. What's your name,
The kids, Mrs. Philpott.
Mrs. Philpott. How many kids are in the house, Mrs. Philpott? Where are they?
I'm 6 of them.
By the time firefighters reached the scene, the house was already filled with thick smoke, and flames had overtaken the hallway. Crews forced their way through the front door and tried to reach the bedrooms, but the fire had moved too quickly. There was nothing they could do. Jade, John, Jack, Jesse and Jaden were all found inside and pronounced dead at the scene. They were aged 10, 9, 7, 6 and 5. Their older brother, 13-year-old Duane, was still alive when they pulled him out, but he died in hospital 2 days later. Post-mortem examinations confirmed that all 6 children had died from smoke inhalation. The response from the local community was immediate. The children's schools released statements and brought in grief counsellors to support staff and classmates. Vigils were held nearby, and within hours, the front of the house had become a memorial. Flowers, candles, and handwritten notes lined the pavement. 3 days later, Mick and Mareed Philpott stood in front of the press. Mick thanked the emergency services and appealed for help finding whoever was responsible. Mareed sat beside him, silent and shaking. At that time, police had already confirmed that the fire was deliberate. Traces of petrol had been found in the letterbox, and investigators believed it had been poured through the door before being set alight. 2 people were arrested, Mick's former mistress Lisa Willis and her brother-in-law, but both were released without charge. And with no forced entry, no eyewitnesses, and no clear motive, attention slowly began to turn back to the only people known to be inside the house when the fire started: Mick and Mareed Philpott. And while the public still saw them as victims, detectives had already begun to look and listen more closely. As the days passed, something about Mick Philpott's behaviour started to raise questions. Mick was speaking to reporters and giving public statements, but the way he talked about what happened didn't sit well with some of the people around him. He was calm, too calm, and at times it sounded like he was repeating something he'd practiced. Soon after, Mick and Mareed were moved into a hotel by the police. What they didn't know was that the room had been fitted with a covert listening device. The recordings captured everything. Instead of grieving, the couple were overheard laughing, making jokes, and going over the details of their police interviews. They corrected each other, rehearsed answers, and made sure their stories matched.
What did you say? Tell me what you said to him then. What did you say about how many times I went up ladders?
I almost can't how many times I went up the ladders.
What did you say about me trying to get in?
You tried everything you could to get in. Like I said to him, I wanted to run through the flames up the stairs.
Would you cry when you were saying it? How bad?
Not really, really bad, but I did cry.
That's hysterical.
8 days after the fire, Mick invited a close friend named Paul Mosley to the hotel. He had known the family for years, and police were listening as soon as he arrived. The 3 of them discussed the investigation, talked through what they'd told the police, and acted as if none of it had anything to do with them. More recordings followed. Their timeline didn't make sense, and their version of events changed, and not once did any of them mention the children. Shortly after, forensic results began to come back. Petrol traces were found on the clothing of all 3 individuals. A glove and a petrol container were recovered near the house and linked directly to the fire. On the 29th of May, Mick and Mareed Philpott were arrested on suspicion of murder. Paul Mosley was arrested a few days later. The trial began on the 12th of February, 2013, at Nottingham Crown Court. As it turns out, Mick Philpott had started the fire to frame his former partner, Lisa Willis. She had left him, taken her 5 children, and a custody hearing was scheduled for the morning after the fire. The plan was to set the fire, raise the alarm, rescue the children, and blame Lisa for the attack. It was supposed to make her look unstable, and in turn, win him sympathy. But the fire spread faster than he expected. He managed to get out, but the children didn't. In court, the jury heard what had been captured in the hotel room. They were also told about Mick's past, his control over the women in his life, and history of violence. On April 2nd, Mick and Mareed Philpott, along with Paul Mosley, were found guilty of manslaughter. Mick was given life in prison, with a minimum term of 15 years. Mareed and Mosley were each sentenced to 17 years. They were told they would serve at least half. Philpott remains in HMP Wakefield. He will be eligible for parole in 2028, but will need to appear before a board to determine whether he still poses a risk to the public. Mareed was released in 2020 after serving 8 years. Mosley was released in 2021, but was recalled shortly after due to concerns about his behaviour, and released again in 2023 after the parole board ruled that his imprisonment was no longer necessary for public protection. There's something especially cruel about recordings like this. A man begging for help, a woman screaming for her children, and for a moment it sounds like everything is real. The fear, the urgency, the panic. But he was the one who set the fire, and whatever panic he felt in that moment doesn't change the fact that this wasn't a tragedy he stumbled into. It was one he caused. That's what makes it one of the darkest recordings ever captured. A man desperate to save his family. But the truth had already been decided, long before he ever made the call.